I feel compelled to talk about Mary's apparition at Fatima, Portugal, to show forth the love of her motherly heart. And so, since I'm talking about the apparition at Fatima, I'm hoping that I don't tell you anything that you haven't heard before or anything that you haven't already known. But to use this opportunity, to use that apparition to reflect on the love of the motherly heart of Mary. God permitted Mary to appear to 3 shepherd children in Fatima, Portugal in the year 1917. So we think about 1917, what was going on. And so they were 3 years into what we now refer to as World War I. And so what's going on is Mary sees her children destroying each other. And it tears at her motherly heart. And to see how her children are harming themselves, hurting themselves, and she wants to weep for her children. And God, Jesus in his great love for his mother, gives her permission to warn her children. And so Mary comes to the shepherd children, and she says that this war will soon end. So she brought good news to the children. And in fact, a year later, the armistice was signed and the war ended. And remember, at the time, this was referred to as the war to end all wars. It was so devastating to the people of Europe. And they saw that when they saw how awful things could be, how awful people could be to one another, they thought, never again. And so they called it the war to end all wars. And yet, Mary told the children, if hearts don't turn to me, there will be another war, a worse war. If families don't pray the rosary every night, there's going to be another war, a worse war. That makes sense coming from the loving heart of a mother. Because from her place in heaven, she could see what the future might hold and what didn't have to be. And of course, as any loving mother, she wanted to spare her children that pain. And so she had this opportunity to tell the children, pray. I can bring peace. The Lord's put it in my hands. But you have to give me your devotion. And as a loving mother, she didn't want to see the pain of another war. And again, remember, at the time they called it the war to end all wars. And how could there be another one? How could there be a worse war? And yet when we look at history, we see her children didn't listen. And there was a worse war. But in that motherly love, she wanted to spare her children. And that's not the only thing that Mary pleaded for with the children at Fatima. Also, out of the same love, abundance of love in her motherly heart, she said to the children, pray the rosary or else the errors of Russia will spread throughout the world. And at the time, that didn't make a lot of sense. The czars, in 1917, the czars were in power, and while they lived luxurious lifestyles, and they might not have been model leaders, the Russian Orthodoxy was the official church of Russia. It's a Christian country. What do you mean they're going to spread their errors throughout the world? And yet, in that same year, 1917, is when the communist revolution happened in Russia. And again, Mary, the love, the abundance of the love in her motherly heart. She knew that what communism would bring, that it's atheistic communism, that it uses the powers of the state to impose atheism. It uses the power of the state to reject any religious claims, any authentic religious claims. What it does, and Mary in her motherly heart saw that what this is going to do is it's going to suffocate, it's going to strangle the best part of man and woman. The part that's in the image and likeness of God is going to be strangled and suffocated by this atheistic communism. And she wants better for her children. And so she warns the children at Fatima, unless hearts turn to me, Russia will spread her errors throughout the world. Her children did not listen, and the errors of communism have spread. And today, even in our own country, there are some who would consider it appealing. But Mary, her mother's heart knows well that it's going to suffocate the best part of you and me, that it's going to try and teach us that we're merely bodies without souls. And she doesn't want that for us. And if I'm going to speak about Fatima, I have to speak about the miracle of the Son. This too comes from the love of her motherly heart. You know, the oldest of the three children was Lucia. I don't remember if she was 11 years old or 9 years old at the time, but Lucia was the oldest of the children of Fatima, and her parents didn't believe her. Her parents didn't believe her, and I mean it's reasonable. It's a reasonable position. I mean, if your child comes to you and says, "I saw Mary, the Blessed Mother, today," you're going to be a little bit slow. You're going to wonder what do you mean? But her parents didn't believe her. And when the Freemasons who were in charge of Portugal at the time imprisoned the children and tried to get the children to renounce their claims, Lucia's parents joined with the mayor, the governor, the local officials, telling Lucia to, just tell them it was all a lie, that you made it up. And so what would that be like for this young girl? That her parents don't even believe her, that her parents are telling her to deny one of the most beautiful things that's happened to her. It was devastating. And so Lucia asked Mary, she said, help them to understand. Help them to understand that it's real. And so Mary, out of the abundance of love in her motherly heart, promised Lucia a sign on the 13th of October in 1917. And what happened isn't just superstition. It's recorded in the newspapers of the day, how the people came, and it was a rainy and muddy, and it was windy, and it was an awful, miserable day. And they got there, they came there in the rain, and their clothes was covered with mud. And then suddenly this strong wind blows through, and their clothes are dry and clean. And they talk about what they saw in the sky. They saw the sun. They often refer to it as dancing. But they saw the sun moving about in the sky in a way that they hadn't seen before. And this isn't superstition. This is recorded in the newspapers of the day. There were 70,000 people who gathered. Thousands of people, believers and unbelievers alike, have spoken about what they saw. It's not just superstition. And it arose from the love of Mary's motherly heart, because her daughter Lucia had asked for vindication of all the suffering that she endured from those who scorned her and disbelieved her. And so we see in the Mary's apparition of Fatima, God permitted her to appear because she wanted to give the plea of her motherly heart, and quite understandably so. We didn't listen, but the children didn't listen to their mother. Will we begin to listen to our mother? I also want to show that the apparitions at Fatima are consistent with how God has worked, how God has revealed earlier in history. Because again, in our gospel today, which we just heard, who were the first people to hear about the child Jesus? Who were the first people to recognize the child Jesus? The shepherds, the poor, the humble. And so when God permitted Mary to appear at Fatima, Portugal, to whom did she appear? to the shepherds, the poor, the humble, is consistent with how God works. Such a marvelous thing. Mary, in the abundance of the love of her motherly heart, gave a warning at Fatima, and she asked for devotion. She asked families to pray a rosary each day. She recommended to us First Saturday devotion, that we might avoid the pains that she foresaw from her place in heaven. When Mary gave the warning in 1917, her children didn't listen. Will we, her children, listen to her today?